Hey, Flavia. I really enjoyed working on the article on regulatory failure and how to understand regulatory failure within a number of regulators in Brazil. So could you briefly explain to the people who are watching this video what the article is about?
Thanks, Jeroen. I really enjoyed working on it with you too. So our general topic relates to the social goals of regulation. So we ask if regulators who dedicate themselves to promoting the universalization of access to services tend to fail less. So that's our main question. So to give an example, if a telecommunication regulator promotes the expansion of their network to poorer areas or to remote areas of a country, does it mean that they will fail less? And we do that in the context of Brazil. So we study 7 regulatory agencies in Brazil, and we look at how much they fail or which of them fail less and why and so on.
Excellent. Look, what I sort of find in my work here in New Zealand, and of course you are here as well, and you probably experienced that too, is that terms such as regulatory success and regulatory failure are incredibly slippery, and they're very often considered to be sort of the opposite. And then you tend to get into the problem that if a regulator wants to claim success, that everybody has 1,000 arguments why what the regulator has done is not the cause of this success, because it could have been circumstances somewhere or just sheer luck for the regulator. So the regulator would have to provide lots and lots and lots of information why something is successful. But then the opposite, when policymakers or the media or the public at large realizes that there is something going wrong and it could be a regulatory failure, then they only seem to need one teensy tiny argument to claim that there is a regulatory failure, which seems to be a little bit unfair, because for the regulator to claim success, they need to have 1,000 arguments, and then for the opposite side to claim failure, they only need to have one argument. But actually, we didn't want to go down that track of talking about failure as the opposite of success and success as the opposite of failure. We actually were thinking slightly differently about operationalizing failure. And I think that's one of the more interesting parts for our viewers now to listen to understand. So how exactly did we do that?
Yeah, so that's a very good point. So regulatory failure is a very complex concept, as you mentioned. Some people talk about it as perception-based, like it's based on perceptions of people who think that regulatory agencies failed. We don't go that way. We choose more objective indicators of failure. So our definition of regulatory failure, or our operationalization of this concept, is based on legally mandated goals. So what is the agency legally mandated to do or required to do, and whether the Federal Audit Court in Brazil identified that they didn't do that by creating like something that is called a legal sentence or a legal acórdão in Portuguese. So whether the audit court identifies failure, this is what we use to operationalize failure.
Excellent. So that's a fairly objective focus on failure, how it is measured by specific organizations. Another thing that I really liked about the way that we worked on this paper is that we are not saying that the absence of failure means success. And that is also something that is not often understood, is that the absence of one thing doesn't mean the opposite of something else. And specifically when we look at the regulatory failure and the regulatory success literature, that seems to be very often sort of the dichotomy. So within the paper, we don't even talk about success. I don't even think we use the term regulatory success. We only talk about was failure observed or was failure not observed? And then, of course, the important question becomes, How can we prevent failure, even if we acknowledge that preventing failure doesn't mean achieving success? So what did we find? How can regulators prevent failure?
Yeah, so we focus on redistribution or universalization of access, right? So you want to find out whether agencies that promote redistribution or that make access more universal, they fail less. So what we find is that not prioritizing redistribution is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for regulatory failure. In other words, a lack of priority to redistribution or access universalization has to be combined with other things to result in failure. And the two other things we found that was really important for redistribution to be combined, lack of redistribution to be combined with, was low regulatory capacity and low levels of competence. So if a regulatory agency does not prioritize redistribution, has low regulatory capacity and low levels of competence, meaning that it does not have a high decision-making power, then it tends to fail. So our initial variable, redistribution, was not the only cause of failure, but it was a necessary one. So
excellent.
It has to
well, thanks for that.
With other things.
Yeah, cheers. So thanks for that. So I think sort of for me, again, what I really enjoyed about working on this article, and that might also sort of indicate my bias for nuanced stories about success and failure, is that indeed this article really indicates that regulatory failure is not the result of one specific thing going wrong, and therefore at the same time, preventing regulatory failure can also not be achieved by just doing one thing well. It is an interaction of various conditions that either explain failure or the absence of failure in our article. So again, I really enjoyed working on it, and of course I hope that the people who are going to read it, the regulation and governance audience, is going to enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed working on it. So with that, I'm going to round up. Thanks for watching, and well, thanks for working on it.
Thank you, Jeroen.
Cheers.
Cheers.